Conference. We will now begin with remarks from Minister Blair.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous.
Good morning.
I am delivering my remarks this afternoon from my home, which is located on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'm very pleased to be joined today by my colleagues, the Minister of National Defence, Minister Anita Anand, the Minister of Transport, Minister Omar Alghabra, the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion, Minister Carla Qualtrough, the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, Minister Stephen Cabot, and we are also pleased to be joined today by the Acting Chief of Defence Staff, General Wayne Eyre. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to acknowledge right at the outset that we know that this has been an incredibly difficult week for the people of British Columbia. We know that people right across the region have been severely impacted, either through the loss of missing or deceased loved ones, for those who have been displaced from their home or who have suffered significant loss and damage. And we also know that this has been impactful on all of the people in British Columbia who have shared concern for their fellow citizens. And at the same time, we have also seen remarkable acts of compassion, of courage and resilience among the people of British Columbia, as people right across the region have stepped up in the face of great adversity and been there for each other. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge all the first responders, all of the citizens, and the Canadian Armed Forces members who have been there for their fellow citizens and Canadians in responding to this emergency. And at the same time, let me also acknowledge the important and collaborative work that has gone on between our ministers and government and all of orders of government, in particular the Premier Horgan and his ministers, who have been working hand in glove with us from the outset of this in order that we may all be there for British Columbians. Also want to acknowledge the extraordinary leadership of mayors, police chiefs, fire chiefs, and others who have stood up and ensured that we are doing everything possible in order to address the significant concerns that have been faced by the people of British Columbia. I'd like to also acknowledge to you all that we are watching very carefully the weather as it continues to evolve in British Columbia. We are tracking very carefully the weather event that is likely to strike British Columbia in the northern and central regions, and the possibility of rain later on through the week. We are working alongside communities to clean up and to rebuild, and we are making significant progress on the ground. But we want to also acknowledge that it will take some time to fully recover from this disaster. It will take a great deal of coordination, collaboration, and cooperation from all of us. And that is why today, the Prime Minister convened a third meeting of the Incident Response Group. And some of the highlights of that meeting include our assessment from Environment Canada about the weather events that have taken place, a situational recap of the damage that has taken place and where we are with the shutdown of some of our important infrastructure in rail, in roadway, in oil and gas infrastructure, in telecommunications. We also received a briefing on the 41 First Nations that have been impacted by flooding, and the 9 First Nations that are currently under evacuation order. Minister of Indigenous Services, Patty Haidu, has been in contact with First Nations leadership and is working closely with them. We know that tens of thousands of animals, including entire herds and flocks, have been lost. Farmlands have been devastated, and the Minister of Agriculture is working very closely with her provincial counterparts and those involved in the agricultural sector to provide the necessary supports. Impacts are being felt across the food supply chain, from farm to retail, with a direct impact on food supply and security, food spoilage, and significant production loss. We know that the overall situation remains serious, but there have been some improvements. River levels are dropping. Highways and rail lines have begun to reopen with priority to the movement of essential goods. Major suppliers report that adequate stocks of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, and agricultural feed supply concerns have been temporarily stabilized as well. We do recognize that livestock losses are anticipated to grow over the coming days, and the safe disposal of livestock that have perished in the flood remain an ongoing issue. All progress is being made on damage assessment, repair, and restoration. And as you know, we approved earlier this week a request for federal assistance from British Columbia for the Canadian Armed Forces to provide support. And as a result, hundreds of Canadian Armed Forces members are now on the ground and are ready to go. And Minister Anand and General Eyre will have much more to say about that in a moment. We've also established, with my colleague Minister Alghabra, a supply chain working group working with the province of British Columbia and a number of important organizations to ensure that essential services are delivered and supply chains are restored. We've been making significant in contingency planning for the flows of people, goods, and services, including via the United States. People are concerned about crossing the border because of the COVID restrictions that are in place. Yesterday, I spoke to Minister Mike Farnworth, Public Safety Minister and Interim Premier in the province, about concerns with fuel shortages in the Lower Mainland and Vancouver area. He asked if it would be possible for individuals who currently reside close to border communities to cross over into the United States in order to fuel their vehicles and upon return be exempt from the PCR requirement. This is something that I believe can be accommodated under the exemption regulations that currently exist. But to be very clear, those exemptions do not apply to non-essential travel. It does apply to people who are required to travel over into the United States in order to obtain essential access to essential goods and services. But it does not include family trips, vacations, or other types of tourist activity. But we will be there to ensure that if, for example, someone in a border community such as Delta, BC, wanted and needed to gain access to the United States at Point Roberts in order to fuel their vehicle, they would be able to do so for that essential purpose and then return without the requirement of providing a PCR test. We know that a large number of people are working very hard to keep people safe and to restore some semblance of normalcy. Volunteers, first responders, workers from numerous industries, and people of all levels of government. Our collective around-the-clock efforts have contributed to significant progress, which is being made to restore key infrastructure, transportation, and utility services to the affected areas of the province. Again, I'd like to offer my sincere gratitude to everyone involved in these efforts. And I will now turn it over to my colleague, Minister Anand, to provide additional details on the exceptional support being offered by the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you.
Merci, Bill. Bonjour tout le monde. I am addressing you from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. These have been difficult days for British Columbians, and I extend my deepest condolences to the loved ones of those who have lost their lives due to extreme weather conditions. To everyone suffering and affected in British Columbia, we stand with you, and we are mobilizing the necessary resources to help you. J'aimerais faire le point sur les dernières activités des forces armées canadiennes. Over the weekend, a large contingent of Canadian Armed Forces personnel was deployed to the Lower Mainland. By the end of today, more than 500 troops will be in British Columbia providing support. Au cours de la fin de semaine, un grand contingent de personnel s'est déployé de l'extérieur de la province vers le Lower Mainland de la Colombie-Britannique. D'ici la fin d'aujourd'hui, plus de 500 membres des forces armées canadiennes seront en Colombie-Britannique pour soutenir la population. Canadian Armed Forces members have been evacuating stranded motorists, conducting damage assessments, rescuing livestock, conducting route reconnaissance, preparing to mitigate the impact of expected heavy rainfalls, and repairing and protecting critical infrastructure, including the Sumas Dike. Canadian Armed Forces members have also completed resupply missions, delivering a total of 3,000 pounds of food to the Noaich and Nikomin First Nations communities near Merritt and Lytton, respectively. Deployed personnel remain as self-sustaining as possible. They are bringing as much of their own food, equipment, and supplies to the area as they can. Right now, the primary focus of CAF operations is conducting relief tasks with the guidance of the province of British Columbia, all while moving additional forces into the province. To that end, the Canadian Armed Forces currently has 12 aircraft, a combination of fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters dedicated to this operation. Most of these aircraft are already in British Columbia, and a few are on their way. Today, the Royal Canadian Air Force transported a sandbagging machine to British Columbia to boost current efforts. Les forces armées canadiennes disposent actuellement de 12 aéronefs, combinaison d'aéronefs à voileurs fixes et d'hélicoptères, soit en Colombie-Britannique, soit actuellement en route à partir de bases à l'extérieur de la province. Aujourd'hui, l'aviation royale canadienne a transporté une ensacheuse de sable en Colombie-Britannique pour renforcer les efforts en cours. Relief efforts are ongoing, and Canadian Forces members are coordinating Air Task Force operations out of Abbotsford and Victoria. As always, search and rescue units are on standby and can be called upon to conduct operations at a moment's notice. Comme je l'ai déjà mentionné, les membres des forces armées travaillent au sein d'une équipe beaucoup plus large à laquelle participent les unités d'intervention d'urgence de la Colombie-Britannique ainsi que nos partenaires fédéraux. As the region faces a forecasted 20 to 40 centimeters of rain tomorrow and Tuesday, I know that the efforts of the Canadian Armed Forces and their partners will remain vital to the well-being of citizens and the protection of critical infrastructure. We thank members of the Canadian Armed Forces and everyone else conducting rescue and relief efforts for their hard work and dedication to supporting their fellow Canadians. So far, we have been able to meet the requests of the province, and should those requests evolve, we will continue to respond and step up accordingly. Jusqu'à présent, nous avons été en mesure de répondre aux demandes de la province. Et si ces demandes évoluent, nous continuerons d'agir. We will continue to do whatever it takes to support British Columbia, and all Canadians are behind you at this time. Nous continuerons de faire tout ce qui est en notre pouvoir pour soutenir les communautés de la Colombie-Britannique et tous les Canadiens. Thank you. Miigwech. Merci. Je passe la parole maintenant à mon collègue, le ministre Alghabra. Omar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anand. Good afternoon. Bonjour à tous. I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I also want to echo the sentiments expressed by my colleagues. This has been a very difficult week, and as we come to grips with the significant damage and displacement of thousands of people caused by the flooding in British Columbia, we will be there for the people of British Columbia. Yet, during this dark time, there have been inspiring moments of collaboration and caring that speak to the very nature of what it means to be Canadian. Whether it's air operators dropping water and other essential supplies to those stranded and without access to basic needs, or air and rail operators adding passenger and cargo capacity to reunite loved ones and keep critical goods moving to and from British Columbia. As Minister of Transport, I am deeply encouraged and grateful to see all aspects of our supply chain operations collaborating and finding creative solutions to respond to this crisis. We are working closely with them and the province of British Columbia to provide any support they require. I'm also in regular contact with my counterpart in BC, Minister Fleming. Together, as we announced yesterday, and as Minister Blair has alluded to, we've launched a supply chain recovery working group. This working group is bringing federal, provincial, and supply chain operators together to restore the movement of goods, including fuel, into the lower mainland quickly. Ultimately, the outcome of this working group will help strengthen and make our supply chain more resilient nationally. Ce groupe aide à renforcer notre chaîne d'approvisionnement.
Our supply chain more resilient nationally.
Meanwhile, to support emergency and recovery efforts, we have taken actions. I have signed an interim order prohibiting non-essential vessel traffic in flooding areas of British Columbia to keep boaters safe and clear for emergency response. But I want to be clear, this interim order does not prevent the use of boats involved in providing any form of assistance. It's only meant to prevent the use of vessels for leisure activities. We've also restricted all aircraft from flying lower than 1,000 feet between Abbotsford Airport and Chilliwack Airport. We will continue to extend these restrictions based on conditions and ongoing recovery efforts. The National Aerial Surveillance Program aircraft have also successfully completed flyovers to assess the railway washouts between Ashcroft and North Bend for damages. Il y en aura aussi d'autres mesures. Based on feedback from rail operators, we are optimistic that rail corridors will open by midweek. This will be an important step in the recovery of our supply chain and ensuring essential goods can get to where they need. We are also encouraged that highways are opening to traffic limited for essential purposes. For example, Highway 1 and Highway 99 opened yesterday in certain sections for essential travel. But there remains a lot of work to be done under challenging conditions. Nevertheless, I know that working together, we will be able to recover and emerge stronger. In closing, I want to once again thank the thousands of workers in our ports, terminals, railway and trucking, marine, towing, and air sectors who are working hard to keep our supply chain flowing. Canada's supply chain is resilient. Nos chaînes d'approvisionnement sont resilient. All hands are on deck. We will continue to take every action we can to rebuild, recover, and restore operations. Merci, thank you. And now I'll pass the mic on to my colleague, Minister Qualtrough.
Thank you, Minister Alghabra. Bon après-midi à tous.
Good afternoon,
It's been
everyone.
heartbreaking to witness the devastating effects of the storms that have hit BC over the last week. My thoughts go out to my fellow British Columbians who have lost loved ones or have been separated from their families as a result of these floods. Over the years, especially over the last 20 months, I've seen us all come together in remarkable ways to support our neighbours and our communities. Whether it's to combat the pandemic, fight against forest fires, or stay cool during a heat wave, we do get through these things together. As you can see today, joined by my colleagues here, we really are using every tool at our disposal to make sure you get the help you need. From my department, this includes resources from Service Canada, who is working with provincial emergency support services, community organizations, and Indigenous communities in affected areas to ensure they know our support is available and accessible. All Service Canada centres in the region remain open for regular business hours, although the best way to get quick access to Service Canada is online. I know many people may be without internet access or have other barriers to getting help from Service Canada. The Outreach Support Centre phone line is also available Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. till 4 p.m., with voicemail available after hours for people in affected areas to get the information and services on programs that they need. Call toll-free at 1-877-631-2657 to receive assistance from a Service Canada representative. Tous les centres Service Canada de la région sont toujours ouverts pendant les heures normales d'ouverture, mais la meilleure façon de contacter rapidement Service Canada est de consulter en ligne. Je sais que de nombreuses personnes n'ont pas accès à l'Internet ou font face à d'autres obstacles pour obtenir de l'aide de Service Canada. Vous pouvez aussi contacter le centre d'appui des services mobiles sans frais à 1-877-631-2637 de lundi au vendredi de 8h à 16h pour recevoir l'aide d'un représentant de Service Canada. As many people have been displaced or could have lost their job due to the flooding and will need to apply for EI benefits. If you are in this situation, you can and should apply for EI online as soon as possible, even without a record of employment. Service Canada will need a mailing address and a residential address for you. So please be ready to share your usual residential address along with a mailing address where you can receive mail. As always, we encourage everyone to register for direct deposit so we can get your payments into your bank account as quickly as possible. However, if direct deposit is not possible for you and you're expecting a paper check, mail service may be interrupted or delayed. So I encourage you to visit the Canada Post website for updates and alternate delivery arrangements or pickup locations. We want to make sure you get the money that you need in these times. Our Service Canada staff in the region have also been in touch with employers who have temporary foreign workers to verify the safety and well-being of all of those working with this program. Our outreach with all these partners will continue to make sure temporary foreign workers are safe and have access to services that they require too. Sadly, this is not the first time and will not be the last time that extreme weather events have created serious emergencies. I know as British Columbians it seems to get worse year over year. Our government has been there in the past to support the province with extraordinary support when people have lost homes and livelihoods, and we will always look at ways to continue to be there to help rebuild and have your backs so everyone can get back on their feet. British Columbians are resilient. We will get through this, and with the help of our neighbours near and far, we'll get through this together. I will turn it over now to Minister Guilbeault.
Merci, ministre Qualtrough. J'aimerais d'abord également souligner que je me joins à vous en provenance du territoire traditionnel non cédé de la nation Gayegehaga et autres peuples Haudenosaunee. D'abord, j'aimerais offrir toutes mes sympathies aux habitants de la Colombie-Britannique qui luttent pour rester en sécurité, protéger leurs familles et leurs maisons, tout en observant leur communauté inondée. Et j'offre mes sincères condoléances aux familles des victimes. En quelques mois seulement, la Colombie-Britannique a ressenti les effets de nombreuses catastrophes naturelles, que ce soit les incendies de forêt dévastateurs ou encore la chaleur extrême, mettant de nombreuses vies en danger. La semaine dernière, de fortes précipitations soudaines résultant d'une rivière atmosphérique ont fait que la région du sud de la Colombie-Britannique a reçu l'équivalent d'un mois de pluie en 2 jours. Le gouvernement du Canada sera toujours là pour aider les Canadiens et les Canadiennes dans le besoin et à faire de fournir toute l'aide nécessaire pour répondre aux conditions météorologiques extrêmes et aux inondations. La situation en Colombie-Britannique demeure sérieuse, mais il y a eu, comme mes collègues l'ont souligné, quelques améliorations. Le niveau des eaux baisse. Les autoroutes et les voies ferrées ont commencé à rouvrir. Et la priorité est donnée à la circulation des biens essentiels. Les principaux fournisseurs confirment un stock suffisant d'essence, de diesel et de carburant aérien. Les problèmes d'approvisionnement en aliments pour animaux ont été également temporairement stabilisés, mais les pertes de bétail devraient augmenter dans les jours à venir. Par ailleurs, l'évaluation des dommages, les réparations et les travaux de restauration progressent. Les forces armées canadiennes sont intervenues. Elles sont sur le terrain en Colombie-Britannique et fournissent un soutien immédiat à ceux et celles qui en ont besoin. Je tiens d'ailleurs à remercier les membres des forces armées, les premiers répondants ainsi que l'ensemble de la population qui participe aux opérations de sauvetage et de secours pour leur travail acharné et leur dévouement à l'égard de leurs concitoyens. Un nouveau groupe de travail sur le rétablissement de la chaîne d'approvisionnement réunira des opérateurs fédéraux, provinciaux et des chaînes d'approvisionnement afin de rétablir rapidement la circulation des marchandises, y compris le carburant, dans le Lower Mainland. Malheureusement, nous savons que les conditions météorologiques extrêmes que la Colombie-Britannique a connues ne sont pas encore terminées. Un autre phénomène de rivière atmosphérique se produit actuellement, affectant la côte nord de la Colombie-Britannique et devrait
shore
glisser
of
vers le
British Columbia
sud,
and should move
apportant plus
towards
de
the
pluie
south, bringing more
au sud de la
rain
Colombie-Britannique
to the southern
demain,
part of
c'est-à-dire
British
lundi.
Columbia tomorrow, that is Monday.
Et une autre rivière
And
atmosphérique
another
devrait affecter
atmospheric
le
river
sud de
should
la
affect the
Colombie-Britannique
southern part
plus
of
tard
British
cette semaine.
Columbia later this week.
Pour plus de détails et pour connaître
For
les
more
dernières informations
details and to find
météorologiques,
out the
nous
latest weather
encourageons les
conditions,
habitants de
we
la
encourage
Colombie-Britannique
residents
à
of
continuer
British
de
Columbia to
suivre les
continue
prévisions
to
météorologiques
follow
officielles
the
et
official
les veilles
weather
et les avertissements
bulletins
d'Environnement
and
et Changement
the
Climatique Canada.
notices from
Alors même que
Environment
les
Canada.
efforts d'intervention se poursuivent,
And
de nombreuses
efforts are
personnes se
continuing.
demandent si
However,
ces
many people are
inondations
wondering if
catastrophiques sont
these
dues au changement climatique.
disasters are due
Bien
to
qu'il ne soit
climate
pas
change.
simple
Although
d'attribuer
it's
un
not
seul événement
easy
météorologique
to
extrême
attribute a
au changement
single
climatique,
event
nous
to
savons qu'à
climate
mesure que le
change.
climat se
We know
réchauffe,
that as the
la
climate heats
modélisation
up,
prévoit que nous connaîtrons de plus en plus
we will
d'événements
see
météorologiques
more
extrêmes
extreme weather
et de façon
events,
plus intense et plus
and
fréquente.
they will become more
Il
frequent
s'agit
and more
d'un rappel
intense.
brutal que même
This is
si
a
nous
brutal
devons
reminder
concentrer nos
that even
efforts
we must
immédiats pour assurer
focus our immediate
la sécurité
efforts
des
on ensuring
Britanno-Colombiens
the safety of
et
British
traverser cette
Columbians,
crise,
help them
nous
get through
devons
this
également
crisis. We
poursuivre nos
must
efforts
also
pour lutter
continue
contre
our
le changement
efforts to fight
climatique
against climate
et
change
nous adapter à leurs effets.
and to adapt to the effect of
While it's
climate
not
change.
simple to attribute a single weather event to climate change, we do know that as climate continues to warm, modeling projects that we will experience more intense and more frequent extreme weather events. It is a stark reminder that even as we focus our immediate efforts on keeping British Columbians safe and getting through this crisis, we must also continue our efforts to fight climate change and adapt to its effect. Mes collègues qui se joignent à nous aujourd'hui ont travaillé jour et nuit et nous continuerons à prendre toutes les mesures possibles afin d'assurer la sécurité des Canadiens et des Canadiennes. Merci. Thank you. Miigwech.
We will now start the question period. As a reminder, you may ask one question and one follow-up. Nous allons commencer la période des questions. Vous pouvez poser une question et une suivie. We will now take questions by phone. Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions par téléphone. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Certainement. Thank you. Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, s'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question, and there will be a brief pause while participants register. Il y aura un court délai vous permettant de vous enregistrer. Once again, please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. De nouveau, appuyez sur l'étoile 1 si vous avez une question à cet instant. The first question is from, la première question vient de Lacia Kretzel, City News. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just want to confirm now, you had, Minister Blair, you said that you had spoken with Minister Farnworth here in BC with regards to Canadians coming back into Canada, not having to quarantine if they're going down for essential purposes such as fuel, food, or to get back to their place of residence. Have you been in contact with the U.S. with regards to Canadians being able to go down? Because that would be at their discretion, whether or not they're going to need things like passports or COVID vaccinations as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And we, of course, have been in contact with Customs Border Patrol through the offices of CBSA, who work very closely and collaboratively with our American colleagues on the southern border, or on our southern border. Canadians will have to abide by all of the requirements of the United States to enter into their country, including producing the appropriate travel documents, but they are not required at this time crossing into the land border to have proof of vaccination, or a proof of a negative PCR test. We do require that under normal circumstances for return, but what is clear is we have existing exemptions in place to the Order in Council that it will allow Canadians to travel into the United States for what is considered an essential purpose. That can include to obtain economic and supply chain services, to provide services that are essential for health, safety, and security, or in support of Indigenous communities. In our discussions with CBSA and with the Americans, traveling into the United States for the purposes of obtaining fuel during the current flood crisis in British Columbia is deemed to be essential. But I also want to be really clear that the Border Service officers will be alert to the issue of allowing people to travel into the United States and to return without a PCR test, with as long as the travel is deemed essential. And to be very clear for people, activities such as visiting a family for a vacation, for checking up on your cottage or attending a social event would not be deemed to be essential under these circumstances. But it will allow someone who lives in a border community in Canada to travel into the United States for the purpose of obtaining essential goods, such as food and other supplies, and returning without the requirement of a PCR test.
Follow up?
Thank you.
Everything, thank you.
The next question is from, la question suivante vient de Ryan Tumulty à National Post. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I guess this question is for Minister Anand. I'm wondering if you feel like the Canadian Forces have resources to continue to provide support to this tragedy, as we're expecting more rain this week. And I know there's also a heavy storm expected in Atlantic Canada, which could do some damage. I'm just wondering if you're starting to feel that maybe the forces are strained responding to disaster.
Thank you, Ryan, for that question. Let me begin by saying that this is the 12th natural disaster-related request for assistance that the Canadian Armed Forces have responded to since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Canadian Armed Forces form a crucial element of our nation's fabric, and the work that has occurred as part of those responses to requests for assistance is testament to the importance of the Canadian Armed Forces in our country, and especially at this time with regards to natural disasters. I will say that through our fully costed and fully funded defense policy, Strong, Secure, Engaged, we will continue to invest in the Canadian Armed Forces reliably and consistently so that the institution can carry out the important tasks that we ask of them, including responding to natural disaster. And I, as Minister of National Defence, will continue to advocate for sufficient resources for the Canadian Armed Forces. At the current time, with regard to British Columbia itself, we have committed to the 30-day request for assistance that the province of British Columbia put forward. But if help is required longer than that 30 days, we will be there to help for as long as it takes. As I said, resources are continued to be provided, and we will always be there to help wherever is needed in this country.
Follow up?
Yeah, this one's for Minister Blair. You mentioned off the top that there is some positive signs. River levels are receding and some transportation infrastructure is reopening. I'm wondering if you have any estimate or expectation of whether or not that will stay the case with the additional rain that's forecast for this week.
Yeah, thanks for the question and the opportunity to provide some clarification. Just to be very clear, there remains in effect a special weather statement for the Haida Gwaii and the BC North Coast region. In that statement, which has been issued by Prepared BC and the Emergency Info BC on their websites, it indicates that there is a potential for flooding and landslides in that region. We also know, and we've been advised by our officials, of the possibility of some of that water making its way into the currently affected regions. And we also know in weather reports that there is rain forecast for the coming week. And because of that, I think there has been over the past couple of days, as a result of some clearing in the weather and some exceptional work being done on the ground, there's been some improvement and a receding of the waters, but we're not out of the woods yet. And to be very clear, we remain concerned about all rain events in the region simply because the ground is quite saturated. And we know that right now there's nowhere for it to go, and a lot of the areas that are currently flooded, they have not been able to begin pumping it out because of the high level of water in those areas. And so we remain concerned, and we'll continue to work really closely and watch the situation carefully. And I think it's also important to take the opportunity to remind all British Columbians who are in areas that could be affected by these weather events to pay a great deal of attention, to listen to the weather warnings that are being issued, to take action to make sure that they are in a place of safety. Our first priority is always the preservation of life and property in these circumstances, and that can best be accomplished if people pay a great deal of attention to the warnings, and if evacuations are ordered, that they respond immediately and follow the directions that are provided.
Next question, prochaine question.
Thank you. La question suivante vient de. The next question is from Paul Johnson at Global News. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Thank you. This is a related question to the storm. It is about the large transportation ocean barge that broke loose and is currently beached on English Bay. It hasn't moved in a number of days. We're wondering if any of you can provide an update on what the plan is to get that back out to where it's supposed to be. I'll let you decide amongst yourselves who's most knowledgeable about this.
Okay, I'll take a jab at this. The Coast Guard is monitoring it very closely. They've been in touch with the owner of the barge, and I think they're monitoring it, making sure that it does not posing any risk to anyone or any property. But there certainly will be action taken when it's appropriate. But the Coast Guard is monitoring it regularly. Thank you.
Follow up.
Any time frame that you can give us, Minister, on when Vancouverites can expect that to be moved? Hours, days, weeks?
I'll have to speak with Minister Murray and the Coast Guard. But as I said, I think given the priorities that they're dealing with right now, and given the sense that they feel that for now it is not posing immediate risks, they will certainly are working with the owner of the vessel on removing it as quickly as possible. I can't give you a specific time on when it will be removed.
Next question.
Thank you very much.
Prochaine question.
The next question is from, la question suivante vient de Rachel Haynes, de Canadian Press. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, this is Rachel Haynes. I'm actually with CTV National News. And my question would be most likely to Minister Bill Blair. It's about any conversations that you might have had with your counterparts in the United States about the Sumac River. Many farmers in Abbotsford right now are blaming some of the flooding on some of that water flowing up from the Sumac River. So is this something that you've addressed with your American counterparts?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rachel. And I can advise that there are obviously ongoing discussions between our officials in British Columbia and in Washington State. And I know there's also been a number of important conversations with our colleagues at FEMA and at Homeland Security in the U.S. About some of the shared concerns, and I think it's important to acknowledge that the land border between our two countries is not a delineation of the impact of the flow of water, and certainly flow of water from the Nooksack River into the Sumac Prairie is a concern. There has been a number of efforts in the past, and dikes and levees in these circumstances clearly failed. I think it's obvious that there's a great deal more work that needs to be done, and that's formed really the basis of the conversation. But let me also acknowledge that there's been really good collaboration and a lot of support that we are receiving from our colleagues in the United States, particularly in Washington State, supporting our efforts in British Columbia. This is clearly a shared responsibility. Both sides of the border have been fairly significantly impacted by this water, but the movement of the water obviously went into the lowest lying area, which was, of course, in the Sumac Prairie area of Lower Mainland BC, and so that's where the greatest impact has been.
Follow up, Rachel.
Yes, thank you, Minister. And my follow-up is about any increase to military assistance. Minister Anand, you did mention that that request for assistance remains there for 30 days, but given the additional water that is coming over the next couple of days, is this number of soldiers going to be higher than 500, or are we going to be looking at 500 soldiers to be in BC for the rest of the week?
Thanks, Rachel. Just to recap, over the weekend, a large contingent deployed from outside the province of British Columbia to the lower mainland. And by the end of today, as you suggested in your question, more than 500 Canadian Armed Forces members will be in British Columbia providing support. There are thousands of additional troops ready to be deployed if the need arises. I will say that the Canadian Armed Forces are surveying damage, delivering supplies to communities, and repairing infrastructure. So we are responding to the provincial requests on an as-needed basis. And as I said, we do stand ready to provide additional troops when the request comes in. For further elaboration on this point, I will hand the mic to General Eyre, who is also on the line. Wayne?
No, thanks, Minister, and thanks for the question. I do have to say, firstly, that your Canadian Armed Forces are extremely proud to be helping the people of British Columbia in this crisis. We are very well connected in with the province, and the province is happy, very happy with the level of assistance at this point. They are not asking for more resources other than the forces that we have currently operating and flowing into the province. That being said, we are very closely monitoring the situation with weather and the duration of this task. And we have other forces, as Minister Anand said, ready to flow in if the need is there. We've already activated and deployed the immediate response unit from Edmonton. We have reconstituted that immediate response unit in Edmonton, based on the headquarters in Edmonton, but also with some troops from CFB Shiloh in Manitoba, and are prepared to flow in more forces from across the country should the need be there.
Next question, prochaine question. Next question, prochaine question.
The next question is from, la question suivante vient de Jim Morris at the Associated Press. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Actually, thank you very much for asking me, but both my questions were answered. The minister, the defense minister, just previously answered my question, so thank you very much.
Next question.
Thank you. The next question is from Nick Wells at Canadian Press. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Sure. I'm just wondering if you can kind of explain your comments about those who have been displaced or lost their jobs applying for EI if they have no history of employment. I'm just looking for a little clarification if that means the normal rules for getting EI are being suspended in this case.
Well, thank you for the important question. Service Canada is working directly with individuals impacted who have had their jobs impacted. And as I said, encourage people to reach out to Service Canada online via the 1877 number. We are waiving the requirement for a record of employment. Obviously, it could be very difficult in these times to get that piece of particular document. We're looking at how the reality of pandemic benefits and people having exhausted their EI is being impacted, has impacted their entitlement to the availability of ongoing EI support. So it's a very live question, and we can assure Canadians and workers that we're going to be there for them. But my number one message is please reach out to Service Canada, apply for EI. We will figure this out for you.
Follow up?
Yeah, this is for the Environment Minister. I know that Minister Farnworth here in BC yesterday talked about Environment Canada working on a ranking system for atmospheric rivers similar to ones in the U.S. I'm curious if we can kind of get a timeline on when to expect that ranking system to be in place for Canada.
Thank you very much for the question. Environment and Climate Change Canada is currently studying the atmospheric river rating scale as it applies to science activity. There are no immediate plans to formally adopt the scale operationally in the short term, but Environment Canada does work to transfer scientific knowledge into the public service to reduce the risks to Canadians face from extreme weather event, and they will be a technical workshop organized by Environment Canada scientists tomorrow, specifically on extreme weather events in BC that we've seen over the past couple of days. So please stay tuned.
Prochaine question.
Thank you. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, please press star 1 if you have a question at this time. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur l'étoile 1 si vous avez une question à cet instant. There are no further questions at the moment, sir. I would like to turn the conference back over to you.
Thank you very much. This concludes today's press conference. Merci tout le monde.
Thanks, everyone.
Merci. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Anita. Thanks, bye.
Thank you. Bye.